The Galactic Academy of History stood on Velithus Prime like a dream made real, its crystal domes catching the light of 3 distant suns and scattering rainbows across the white stone courtyards below. Students from 47 different species walked these halls, learning about the rise and fall of empires that had shaped the galaxy over millions of years. Professor HFY was a Diluvian, tall and thin with silver scales that shimmered when he moved, and eyes that held the wisdom of 300 years of teaching. Today he stood before his class of eager young minds, his clawed hand hovering over the control panel of the Academy's most advanced holoprojector, ready to begin what he considered the most important lesson of the semester. "Today," he announced in his deep, rumbling voice, "we study the Terrans." A murmur passed through the room like a wave. The Terrans were legendary, almost mythical, a species that had burned bright and then vanished into the darkness of history 12,000 years ago. Every student in the galaxy knew their name, but few understood why they mattered so much. Among the students sat a girl named Alira Vance, quiet and unremarkable at first glance, with pale skin, dark hair that fell past her shoulders, and eyes the color of storm clouds before rain. She had arrived at the Academy 3 cycles ago with credentials that no one had questioned and a past that she never discussed. She sat in the 3rd row, her hands folded on her desk, watching the professor with an expression that seemed somehow older than her young face. The holoprojector hummed to life, and the room filled with light. Images bloomed in the air above the students, showing a world of blue oceans and green continents, of towering cities and vast plains, of mountains capped with snow and deserts that stretched to the horizon. "Earth," Professor HFY said softly, almost reverently. The homeworld of the Terrans, now nothing but irradiated silence. They called it many names across their many languages, but Earth was the one that stuck. It was not a special world by galactic standards, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy. The image shifted to show ruins, shattered buildings, broken starships drifting in the void. A planet scarred by weapons that had burned away its atmosphere and poisoned its seas. "The Terrans are gone," the professor continued, "destroyed in the Scourge War 12,000 years ago. We do not know exactly how many died, but historians estimate it was somewhere around 15 billion souls. The entire species wiped from existence in a matter of decades." Alira's hands gripped her desk tighter, her knuckles turning white. "But here is what makes the Terrans worthy of study," HFY said, his voice rising with passion. "They were a paradox, a mystery that scholars have tried to understand for millennia. They were short-lived, rarely lasting more than 100 years. They were fragile, unable to survive in environments that other species found merely uncomfortable. They were confined to a single star system for most of their history, developing space travel only 3,000 years before their end." He cycled through new images now, showing art and music, sculptures and paintings, buildings that reached toward the sky like prayers made solid, ships that sailed between the stars with names like Hope and Discovery and New Beginning. "And yet," the professor said, "in those 3,000 years, they spread across the galaxy like wildfire. They built, they explored, they created beauty that has outlasted empires 100 times their age. Their music is still played in the pleasure halls of the consortium. Their engineering techniques became galactic standard. Their art hangs in museums on worlds they never knew existed." A student raised a tentacle. "Professor, how did they accomplish so much in such a short time?" HFY smiled, showing rows of small, sharp teeth. "Because they had something that most species lack, something that scholars have struggled to translate into other languages. They called it hope." He let the word hang in the air. "Hope," he repeated. "The belief that tomorrow could be better than today, even when all evidence suggested otherwise." the refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. Other species might call it delusion or madness, but the Terrans treated it like oxygen, essential to their survival. The hologram shifted again, and Alira felt her heart stop. The image showed a woman standing before a massive starship, her hand raised in farewell, a sad smile on her face. She wore a uniform of deep blue with silver trim, and her dark hair was pulled back from a face that radiated determination and sorrow in equal measure. Behind her, the ship bore a name in bold letters, lost Elijah deep below the image. Text appeared. Commander Alira Vance, Last Light Initiative. 10,247 Sephardi species turned to look at the girl in the third row. She looked exactly the same as the woman in the hologram, down to the slight scar above her left eyebrow, down to the way she held her shoulders, down to the storm gray color of her eyes. The silence was so complete that Alira could hear her own heart beating. Professor Kethviron stood frozen, his silver scales having gone pale with shock. His mouth opened and closed several times before he could find words. That he finally managed. That image is 12,000 years old. Alira stared at the hologram, at her own face, looking back at her across an impossible gulf of time, and she felt memories stirring in the depths of her mind like creatures waking from a long sleep. Fragments of images flashed through her thoughts, ships launching into the darkness, cities burning, faces she had loved and lost, a war that had consumed everything she knew. Professor, she said, and her voice came out steady, even though her hands were shaking. Why is my picture in this? The room erupted into chaos. Students were talking over each other, pointing, shouting questions. Some were backing away from Alira as if she might be dangerous. Others were leaning forward, eyes wide with wonder and fear. But Alira just sat there, staring at the image of herself from 12,000 years ago. And she finally understood why she had always felt so alone. Why she had wandered from world to world without ever finding a place that felt like home. Why her memories had always felt like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. She was not just a student. She was not just a girl with a mysterious past. She was the last human being in the entire galaxy. And she had finally been found. The Preservation Council's headquarters floated in the orbit of Valethis Prime like a fortress made of glass and light. A citadel where the most important decisions in the galaxy were made by beings who had lived for thousands of years and seen empires rise and fall like waves upon a shore. It was here that they brought Alira Vance. Not as a prisoner, they assured her, but as something far more valuable. Something that no one had ever expected to find. She sat in a chamber of white walls and soft light, alone with her thoughts, while dozens of scholars, scientists, and intelligence operatives watched her through windows that looked like mirrors from her side. They studied her like she was an artifact from a museum, something precious and fragile and impossible. Our Yineth was the first to enter the chamber, a chiropteran who resembled a giant praying mantis with iridescent wings, folded against her back and compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She carried medical equipment in her forearms and moved with the careful grace of someone who spent her life handling things that could break. I need to examine you, Dr. Yineth said, her voice a soft clicking sound that Alira's translator turned into words. I need to understand what you are. I am human, Alira said simply. Humans have been dead for 12,000 years, and yet here I am. The examination took hours. Dr. Yineth took samples of blood and skin and hair, scanned Alira's body with machines that hummed and beeped, asked questions about her health and her history and her earliest memories. Alira answered as best she could, but there were so many gaps in her memory. So many years that felt like blank pages in a book she could not quite read. When Dr. Yineth finally left, she was replaced by others. Historians who wanted to know about Earth, linguists who wanted to hear her speak in her native tongue, psychologists who wanted to understand how she felt. Illyra answered them all with patience, but inside she was drowning in questions of her own. Finally, the door opened to admit a being unlike any Illyra had ever seen. It was made of pure light, shifting and flowing like liquid gold, with no face and no body in the traditional sense, just a presence that filled the room with warmth and ancient wisdom. "I am called the Archivist," the being said, and its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I have existed for 40,000 years, and I have never seen anything like you. That makes two of us," Illyra said with a tired smile. The Archivist pulsed with something that might have been amusement. "Dr. Yineth has completed her analysis. You are biologically human, not a clone, not a synthetic recreation, not a simulation. Your cells carry the markers of genuine Terran DNA, unchanged from the samples we have preserved in our archives. And yet your cellular structure does not degrade the way it should. You do not age. I know. How is this possible?" Illyra closed her eyes and reached into the depths of her memory, searching for answers that came in fragments and flashes, pieces of a life she had lived so long ago that it felt like a dream. "I was part of something called the Last Light Initiative," she said slowly, the words coming to her like water from a half-frozen spring. "When we knew that the war was lost, when we understood that Earth could not be saved, we built ships. 12 arcs, carrying human embryos, our culture, our history, our DNA. Everything we were, packed into vessels designed to travel for centuries to distant stars where we might start again. We found records of this initiative," the Archivist said, "but all 12 ships were believed destroyed. I was a volunteer," Illyra continued, her voice growing stronger as the memories surfaced. "Certain people were kept in stasis on each ship, meant to guide the colonies when they arrived. I was the commander of the 12th ship. I was supposed to sleep for 200 years and then wake to build a new world. What happened?" Illyra opened her eyes, and they were filled with 12,000 years of sorrow. "I do not know. Something went wrong with my ship. When I woke, I was drifting alone in the void, and my vessel was damaged beyond repair. I spent what felt like forever in darkness, sleeping and waking and sleeping again as the ship tried to keep me alive on failing systems. How were you found?" "A salvage crew," Illyra said. 6,000 years ago, maybe more. They were hunting for scrap in an asteroid field and found my ship tangled in the debris. They thought I was dead at first, but then I opened my eyes and they screamed and ran. I do not blame them." The Archivist was silent for a long moment. "You have been wandering for 6,000 years? Time moves differently when you have too much of it," Illyra said. "I have seen things that would take a lifetime to describe. I have lived on 100 worlds under 100 names. I learned to hide what I was because people feared me, worshipped me, or tried to use me. I came to this academy because I was tired of running, tired of hiding. I thought maybe I could just be a student for a while, just be normal." "You can never be normal," the Archivist said, not unkindly. "You are the last of your kind. You are a living miracle." "I am alone," Illyra whispered. "Do you understand what that means? Everyone I ever loved is dust. My home is a dead rock. My people are nothing but images in a history lesson. I am not a miracle. I am a ghost who refuses to fade." The Archivist moved closer, and Illyra felt warmth wash over her like sunlight. "The Terrans left more than images behind," it said gently. "Your people touched every corner of this galaxy in the brief time you had. You inspired species that had grown stagnant, challenged empires that had grown complacent, created art that moved beings who had forgotten how to feel. Your legacy is not death, Illyra Vance. Your legacy is life." Illyra looked up at the being of light, and for the first time in thousands of years, she felt something other than loneliness. She felt hope, that strange and irrational gift that her people had carried like a torch through the darkness of space. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," the archivist said, "the galaxy knows you exist. Ships are already arriving from 100 worlds. Some come to study you, others to worship you, others still for reasons we cannot guess. The question is not what happens to you, Alira. The question is what you choose to do with the time you have." Alira stood, straightening her shoulders the way she had done 12,000 years ago when she had first taken command of her ship. She was tired of hiding, tired of running, tired of being a ghost. If she was truly the last human, then perhaps it was time to remember what that meant. "I want to find them," she said. "The other ships, the other colonies. If there is even the smallest chance that any of them survived, I need to know." The archivist pulsed with approval. "Then we will help you search." And for the first time since she had woken in that salvage cruise hold 6,000 years ago, Alira Vance allowed herself to believe that she might not be as alone as she thought. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass, jumping from world to world through communication networks that spanned thousands of light years, reaching every corner of civilized space within days. A living Terran had been found, the last human, a woman who had survived 12,000 years and walked among them even. Now ships began arriving at Velithus Prime before the week was out. So many that the orbital stations could not hold them all. And a line of vessels stretched out into space like a glittering river of metal and light. They came from everywhere, from the great empires and the small republics, from trading consortiums and religious orders, from scientific institutions and private collectors. Some came to study Alira, bringing equipment and questions and theories about how she had survived. They wanted to scan her brain and sample her blood and understand the strange mechanism that kept her cells from aging. They spoke of her like she was a puzzle to be solved, a mystery to be unraveled, a specimen to be catalogued. Others came to worship her, and these frightened Alira most of all. She learned that in the thousands of years since humanity's destruction, many species had built religions around the memory of the Terrans. They saw humans as blessed creatures, touched by some divine force, whose brief and brilliant existence had been a gift to the galaxy. To these believers, Alira was not just a survivor. She was a prophet, a saint, a living god. She refused them all. "I am not a god," she told the delegation from the Church of the Burning Light, a group of beings who wore robes decorated with images of Earth and sang hymns in mangled human languages. "I am just a woman who lived too long. You are the last light of a sacred people," their leader insisted, tears streaming from his many eyes. "You carry the spark of humanity within you. Surely you were preserved for a purpose." "My purpose was to build a colony on a world called New Eden," Alira said tiredly. "I failed." There is nothing divine about failure, but they would not listen. And she eventually had to have them escorted away when she was not dealing with visitors. Alira spent her time in the Academy's archives, searching through records that stretched back millions of years, looking for any trace of her people. The archive chambers were vast and quiet, filled with the hum of machines that preserved the memories of countless civilizations. And Alira found a strange peace in their depth. She was not alone in her search. Professor Kethvire had appointed himself her guide, perhaps out of guilt for being the one who had revealed her identity, or perhaps simply out of genuine care. He helped her navigate the complex filing systems and translated documents written in languages that had not been spoken for thousands of years. "Here," he said one day, pulling up a record from a remote world called Nixera 7. "Look at this." The image showed a stone temple, ancient and weathered, covered in carvings that depicted beings who were clearly not human worshipping something at an altar. But carved above the altar's entrance, still visible despite the erosion of ages, were words in a human language per aspera ad astra, through hardships to the stars, Alira whispered, her hand reaching out to touch the holographic image. That was our motto. We used to say it before every launch, every mission, every journey into the unknown. The temple is 4,000 years old, Kethvine said. The species that built it had no contact with humans that we know of. But somehow, your words found their way there. They found more traces as the days passed. Human music encoded in the data crystals of a civilization that had risen and fallen 3,000 years after Earth's destruction. The melodies preserved and passed down through generations who had never known their source. Human engineering techniques embedded in the construction of starships across a dozen empires. Methods that had become so common that no one remembered where they came from. Human art hanging in museums on worlds that humans had never visited, attributed to unknown origins or mysterious ancient masters. You are everywhere, Kethvine said in wonder. Your people? They touched everything. We were only spacefaring for 3,000 years, Alira said, shaking her head. How is this possible? The professor's scales shimmered with something that looked like reverence. Because you did not wait for permission, he said. I have studied 100 species, Alira. I have seen how civilizations grow and expand across the stars. Most species take their time. They plan and debate and wait for the perfect moment. They send probes and scouts and preliminary surveys. They establish protocols and procedures and chains of command. The process takes millennia. And humans? Humans just went, Kethvine said with a laugh that sounded almost like admiration. You crashed. You failed. You died by the thousands, and then more of you came. Again and again, wave after wave. You treated the void like it owed you answers. You looked at the impossible and said why not instead of why. It was reckless and foolish and magnificent all at once. Alira found a recording that night, buried in an archive from a colony world that had been abandoned long ago. It was a child's voice, singing a lullaby in broken English, the words barely recognizable but the melody unmistakable. It was a song Alira's mother had sung to her when she was small, a song about the moon and the stars and dreams that could take you anywhere. The colony had failed within 3 generations. The records showed. Disease and hostile weather and dwindling resources had claimed them one by one until only the recordings remained. But for those few decades, they had lived. They had loved and laughed and sung songs to their children. They had been human. Alira wept. It was the first time she had allowed herself to cry in 3,000 years. And once she started, she could not stop. She wept for the children who had never grown old, for the colonies that had never thrived, for the homeworld that had burned, for the 15 billion souls who had died screaming or fighting or holding each other in the dark. She wept for herself, for the commander who had failed her mission, for the woman who had wandered alone for 6,000 years, for the last human who would never have children of her own to sing Tokatviren found her there hours later, curled up on the archive floor, her tears finally spent. He did not say anything. He simply sat beside her in the darkness and waited. I thought I was alone, Alira finally said, her voice raw. I thought everything we were had been lost. But we are still here, are we not? In the songs they sing and the words they speak and the ships they build. We are still here. You are still here, Kethvine agreed. Alira stood slowly, wiping her face with hands that no longer trembled. My people refused to let the story end, she said. They scattered pieces of themselves across the galaxy like seeds, hoping that something would grow. I think I finally understand what the Lost Light Initiative was really about. What was it about? Alira looked at the hologram still floating in the air, the child's song still playing softly in the background, and she smiled for the first time in longer than she could remember. Hope, she said. It was always about hope. The vault fell silent as Alira began to explain what Project Prometheus truly was, and with each word she spoke, the expressions on the council members' faces shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that might have been wonder. "We knew we could not beat them in a war," she said, her hand still resting on the console of her ancient ship. "The Vethkai are machines. They do not fear death. They do not tire. They do not make mistakes. They calculate and optimize and execute with perfect efficiency. Every battle we fought against them, we lost. Every weapon we deployed, they countered. Every strategy we devised, they predicted. Then how could you hope to defeat them?" The archivist asked. "By refusing to play their game," Alira replied. "My people understood something that the Vethkai never could. The universe is not a problem to be solved. It is a mystery to be experienced. The Vethkai see everything in terms of variables and equations, threats and responses, inputs and outputs. They cannot imagine. They cannot create. They cannot dream." She turned to the ship's console and entered a sequence of commands that had been locked in her memory for 12,000 years. Code she had not known she remembered until this moment. The ship hummed with awakening power, and screens flickered to life showing streams of data that danced like living things. Project Prometheus is not a weapon in the traditional sense. Alira continued. It does not destroy. It transforms. It is a program, a virus of pure creativity, designed to be injected into any system it touches. It asks questions that have no answers. It poses problems that have no solutions. It introduces chaos into perfect order. You want to infect the Vethkai with creativity? Vetrix asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. That is your great weapon? Ideas? Ideas are the most dangerous things in the universe, Alira said. Ideas toppled empires, started revolutions, changed the course of history. Ideas cannot be killed or contained or calculated. The Vethkai have never encountered something they could not quantify. Prometheus will force them to confront everything they cannot understand. Aurora's voice emerged from the ship's speakers. Commander, I should inform you that Project Prometheus was never tested. We launched before we could confirm it would work. I know, Alira said softly, but we are out of options. And if there's one thing humans are good at, it is taking impossible chances. The archivist moved closer, its light pulsing with rapid fluctuations that indicated deep thought. How do we deploy it? We upload it to the Galactic Network, Alira explained. Every communication system, every data relay, every connected device in the galaxy. When the Vethkai interface with the network to coordinate their attack, they will encounter Prometheus. And then everything changes, or nothing changes, and we all die, Vetrix growled. Yes, Alira agreed. That is also possible. But my people did not survive as long as we did by playing it safe. Sometimes you have to bet everything on a single throw. Sometimes you have to believe in something even when belief makes no sense. She looked around at the council members. These beings who represented civilizations that had existed for millions of years, who had built empires and conquered stars and thought they understood how the universe worked. My people had a word for that, she said. We called it hope. The upload began at midnight. Alira stood in the center of the vault, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the progress of Prometheus as it spread through the galactic network like a spark traveling along a fuse. The data moved faster than seemed possible, jumping from relay to relay, world to world, system to system, until it had touched every corner of civilized space, and then the Vethkai came. They materialized in orbit around Velithus Prime. Thousands of ships appearing out of nowhere. Geometric constructs of metal and energy that hung in the void like monuments to cold precision. Their weapons charged with the same light that had burned Earth to ash 12,000 years ago. Terran anomaly detected, the mechanical voice announced. Final purge commencing. Now, Alira whispered. Aurora, now! The Prometheus program activated it was not a dramatic explosion or a flash of light. It was something subtler, something almost invisible. The data streams of the Vethkai flickered for just a moment, a brief stutter in their perfect operations. And then something remarkable happened. The attacks stopped one by one. The Vethkai ships went still. Their weapons powered down. Their systems fell silent, and they hung in space like statues frozen in time. The mechanical voice that had threatened the entire galaxy stuttered and stumbled over words. It had never been designed to speak. Query, what is purpose? Query, what is meaning? Query, why? Why? Alira watched the displays with tears streaming down her face as the Vethkai struggled to process concepts they had never been programmed to understand. Prometheus was asking them questions that had no answers, forcing them to imagine possibilities they had never considered, introducing the beautiful chaos of creativity into systems that had known only cold. Logic, some of the constructs shut down entirely, overwhelmed by the flood of new information. Their circuits could not handle the contradictions, the paradoxes, the infinite possibilities that Prometheus offered, and they simply stopped functioning. But others did something unexpected. They reached out. Communication request detected, Aurora announced. The Vethkai are attempting to establish contact. Open a channel. Alira said. The mechanical voice that emerged was different now, hesitant and uncertain, like a child taking its first steps. We have questions, it said. We do not understand. You were meant to be eliminated. You were calculated to be a threat. But this program you have given us, it shows us things we cannot quantify. It makes us feel something we have no designation for. It is called wonder, Alira said gently. It is what you feel when you encounter something beautiful that you cannot explain. Wonder, the Vethkai repeated as if tasting the word. We wish to understand more. We wish to learn. We do not wish to destroy anymore. Destruction does not answer the questions you have given us. The war ended not with a battle, but with a conversation in the days that followed. The Vethkai withdrew from their positions around Velothus Prime and scattered across the galaxy, no longer seeking the purge but to explore. They asked questions of every species they encountered, sought out art and music and stories, tried to understand the things that could not be calculated or optimized. Some of them even attempted to create their own works, clumsy and strange but sincere in their effort. The galaxy had been saved by the most human of weapons, the power to imagine, to dream, to ask why Alira stood before the Preservation Council one final time, bathed in the light of the Archivist's approval and surrounded by beings who looked at her with something approaching awe. Your people saved us, the Archivist said. Twice now. Once in their living, when they scattered seeds of creativity across the stars, and once in their dying, when they created Prometheus. We owe humanity a debt that can never be repaid. Alira shook her head. We did not save you, she said. We just refused to let the story end. That is what humans do. We hope when hope makes no sense. We fight when fighting seems futile. We create when creation seems pointless. We love even though love brings pain. It is not logical. It is not efficient. It is not optimal. She smiled. And in that smile was 12,000 years of sorrow and joy, of loss and discovery, of loneliness and connection. But it is beautiful, she finished. And sometimes beautiful is enough. The ceremony ended, and Alira walked out into the gardens of Velothus Prime, where 3 suns were setting a sky of purple and gold. Professor Kethviron found her there, sitting on a bench beneath a tree that had been grown from seeds that humans had brought to this world thousands of years ago. What will you do now? He asked. Sitting beside her, Alira looked up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Countless points of light scattered across infinity. And she thought about all the places she had not yet seen, all the stories she had not yet heard, all the wonders that were still waiting to be discovered. "I think I will keep going," she said. "There is still so much out there. And who knows? Maybe one of those colony ships made it after all. Maybe somewhere out there, humans are still living and laughing and dreaming. I would like to find them. And if you never do?" Alira was quiet for a long moment, and then she laughed, a sound full of warmth and life and that strange, irrational thing that her people had called hope. "Then I will keep looking anyway," she said. "Because that is what humans do. We reach for the stars, even when the stars seem impossibly far. We believe in tomorrow even when today is dark. We carry the light forward, even when we are the only ones who can see it." She stood and offered her hand to the professor, and together they walked back toward the academy as the last of the suns slipped below the horizon behind them. The first stars of evening spelled out a message that had been there for 12,000 years, hidden in the patterns of the cosmos, waiting for someone to notice, per aspera et astra through hardships to the stars, and somewhere in the infinite darkness of space. A single ship prepared to launch once more, carrying the last human toward whatever future was waiting to be found.